Pleasant good morning to everyone. My name is Lataya Duncan, Nutrition Surveillance Coordinator within the Ministry of Health St. Kitts and Chair of the Fan Country team. A warm welcome to all represented here today. Speakers, Ms. Keithlin Caroo and Professor Fitzroy Henry, team members, stakeholders, media, fan technical team. Today's event is the continuation of discussing, sharing ideas, and together exploring what we need to change about the way we do business to achieve sustainable nutrition, food security, and the importance of food and nutrition security in St. Kitts and Nevis. St. Kitts and Nevis is undergoing a period of nutritional epidemiological transition. The nutrition transition is reflected in a shift in diets away from indigenous staples, such as starchy roots and cereals, locally grown foods, vegetables, legumes, and limited food from animals, to diets that are more varied and energy dense, consisting of more processed foods, including beverages, more food from animals, more foods with added sugars, high in fats and oils and sodium, and often more alcohol. This shift in diet is ultimately reflected in the epidemiological transition, which is seen in a reduction of undernutrition, infectious diseases, and an increase in overweight and obesity. One of the main risk factors in nutrition are food-related non-communicable chronic diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, stroke, cardiovascular diseases, and some form of cancers. The FAN project team recognized that there is a direct relationship between food and the nutritional health and well-being of the citizens in St. Kitts and Nevis. A desirable relationship cannot be left to chance, and the project has a key role to play in establishing food and nutrition policies and programs that will promote rational food choices and healthy lifestyles by the population, as to why we are here today. Although we have made progress since we entered, it is increasingly clear that such progress has been uneven and in some time reverted by shocks, such as conflict, food price volatility, climate change, and as recent COVID-19. The list goes on, unfortunately, and serves to heighten our awareness that achieving sustainable and inclusive development, a development that really leaves no one behind, implies a profound transformation of the ways we think and act. Food nutrition security is essential for such development, and also as an outcome of it, a way of measuring whether development is really sustainable and inclusive, whether the benefits of innovative financing have reached the communities, or whether agricultural research has helped to improve lives and livelihoods of vulnerable people. Put simply, without food and nutrition security, lives, livelihoods, and ultimately society suffers profound and tragic losses. If we have learned anything, it is that resilient food and nutrition secure livelihoods cannot be achieved without paying attention to resource allocation, agriculture, and nutrition. The purpose of today's event is precisely to highlight some of the ways this project, improving household food and nutrition security and public health in CARICOM, are setting out to assist us to answer some of our questions and to ensure collective mobilization to build on that momentum. To conclude, I am very encouraged by the continuous participation of members here today, and I am confident that today's dialogue will further inspire us collectively and constantly to be bold, to identify new directions, and to strive for innovations. I wish for success, and I count on your collective engagement today to inspire in order to break out from the confines of conventional institutional and sectorial boxes and fundamental change to the ways we work together. Thank you. I will now give a brief overview of the webinar. In 2008, the International Development Research Center, IDRC, funded the Food and Nutrition Fund project with the overarching goal of improving dietary patterns and dietary diversity among CARICOM populations to reduce the burden of diet-related non-communicable diseases in the region. The project is led by the University of the West Indies and undertaken in 3 Caribbean countries, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and of course, St. Kitts and Nevis. The Fan Country Team Update and Revitalization webinar series plans to strengthen coordination between the Fan Project, the St. Kitts and Nevis project team, and the project work in country in order to enhance the sustainability of country interventions. Please note the ground rules. Your microphone is muted. To speak during discussion sessions, click the raise hand icon. Click the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. Click the question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen. If you prefer to type or answer a question you have, no use of inappropriate or offensive language will be accepted. The technical team for today is Catherine Brown, and Catherine, who is already doing her job as usual, will be controlling the slides. We have Ashley Foster-Etwick and Elena White will track persons with raised hands and unmute them to speak during discussion segments and read aloud some questions or comments from the question and answer area. I will now invite Catherine to take over to discuss the poll. Catherine?
Thank you, Latoya. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the webinar. So when you logged on, you will have seen just 2 short questions, getting to know you questions. And I see 85% of you have answered them. So I'm just going to give you about 10 more seconds if you've not answered these questions to do so now. And then once I see more of us have answered, I will share the poll results. So I'll just give you a couple minutes if you've not already answered those questions. All right, we've got some more. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. So you should see the results on your screen. So our audience today, mostly from government, 50% of you are from the government. About just over a quarter are other. Interesting to know who you are. We have 17% from the private sector and just 6% from civil society. And what are we hoping to get out of the session? Our main reason is to improve knowledge about issues related to food and nutrition security in St. Kitts. Fantastic. We also want to learn more about the FAN project, networking, and finally to engage in civic duty. So thank you for answering the poll, and I will pass back on to Latoya. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. We will now move into the main agenda items for today, which is the presentation. I will now introduce the speakers, who are researchers of the FAN project team. With us, we have Ms. Keithlin Caroo, is an advocate and change maker in the fields of gender equity in agriculture and rural development. She is the founder of Helen's Daughters, a non-profit organization that focuses on rural women's economic empowerment through advocacy, capacity development, and improved market access. Secondly, we have Professor Fitzroy Henry. Professor Henry has served 18 years as the director of the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, a specialized center of the Pan-American Health Organization, and is a professor of public health nutrition in the College of Health Sciences and the School of Public Health and Health Technology in the University of Technology, Jamaica. Welcome to our researchers. We will now welcome Ms. Keithlin Caroo to begin her presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you so much, the FAN project, for actually being able to put this together. Today, my main purpose is really to provide a brief snapshot on what we entitled the Women's Farmers Academy. So just give me 1 second. I'm just going to. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. As you know, there's always a technical difficulty. So my name is Keithlin Caroo, and I am the Executive Director of Helen's Daughters, which is a non-profit based out of the country of St. Lucia. But thanks to the FAN project, we have now expanded to St. Kitts and Nevis and to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Starting in 2021, we created an intervention called the Women's Farmers Academy. And as I said, this will be a brief snapshot on the programs that have occurred thus far. So just to give you a background with regards to Helen's Daughters and also the FAN partnership, Helen's Daughters started in 2016 from a UN Women proposal, and it was simply because we noticed that there was a need to support rural women. As we perhaps may know, small farms feed more of the world's population than larger industrial farms. And the larger share of small farm holders tend to be women and tend to be youth. Particularly the women that are smallholder farmers are more interested in their male counterparts when it comes to nutrition. Obviously, because they're not just growing for mass production, but actually for the nutrition of themselves and their families. And we created this organization really to provide women with support in agricultural techniques, more modern techniques, capacity building, which the Women's Farmers Academy is an example of this, and also trying to improve their market access. It's really nice to be in this webinar now because this collaboration has been, I think, just over 2 years kind of ideating and co-creating and finally implementing. The collaboration really started in a sense on a whim by the meeting Professor Lafia Samuels on a webinar that was organized by Mission Food Possible, another grassroots organization, I believe, based in Jamaica. And we were both panelists on a webinar focused on mobilizing change at a grassroots level to improve food security in the Caribbean. We at Helen's Daughters had already had a training program that we were running from 2018 called the Rural Women's Ag Academy. And when Professor Samuels reached out, since July of 2020, we were ideating and kind of co-creating what exactly would be the best intervention for St. Kitts and Nevis and also St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And the fruit of our collaboration became the Women's Farmers Academy. Obviously, we had a lot of aligned goals, and really what we wanted to do was create an educational intervention for rural women, smallholder farmers who were women, with the aim of removing barriers for farmers in terms of access to agricultural training, trying to empower more women to actually go into the sector of farming, changing the mindset that you're not just a farmer or farmer, as I like to say, but an agricultural entrepreneur. And finally, because of the FAN project, really, I think we bolstered our programming in terms of nutrition and how we tie agriculture and nutrition and educating our producers to really understand what they grow and how they can also in turn educate their consumers. So I will just say, before we started with Helen's Daughters and when we tried to kind of create interventions in the region, one of the things that we noticed, one, was that when it came to access to agricultural training, the timing did not suit many persons with a farming type of schedule. Obviously, you found training programs that were in the middle of the weekday at 2 p.m. This is even worse for women in agriculture because, as you know, women take on a larger share of unpaid care work, such as taking care of the elderly and children as well. What you will see in our further research is that a lot of women hold down full-time jobs, and this is also an additional stream of income. So it's trying to find the best ways and the most flexible ways to kind of allow them to be able to access this training rather than creating a disruption in their regular pattern. Another thing that we're quite proud of, not only in the Women's Farmers Academy, but at Helen's Daughters, is that we try to ensure that our facilitators, our mentors come from the region. More particularly, we really try our best to find facilitators that come from the country. With SKN, 60% of the facilitators were in country. We had a very rigid recruitment process, not only through our UE counterparts, our UE Open Campus counterparts, also within my networks as well, to try to find persons that, one, were actually within the sector, two, actually had a background of working with rural communities, and three, that they still continue to work with these communities. So there's a vested interest in not just facilitating and this one-stop shop, I teach, I get paid, and I move on, but there's a vested interest in actually seeing our women mentees actually thrive and put into practice what they learn in the Women's Farmers Academy. We created a Train the Trainers program, and we've done this throughout our programs, really, because while the substance is important, I think that was why the recruitment process was so rigid, but it's also the approach. Obviously, as you know, when we were co-creating and designing the FAN project, we believe that this would actually be an in-person intervention. Obviously, with the pandemic, and in some situations, even, for example, with St. Vincent and the Grenadines, an eruption, we had to create a digital format. We quickly pivoted, and really we focused quite a bit with regards to the Train the Trainers program, not only on the substance, but also the approach. How to engage, keep our women farmers engaged in a program, one, that was completely free, so there's not that onus to necessarily keep taking part in it. Two, how do you kind of overcome the Zoom fatigue, the fact that the experience will not be the same virtually as it is in person. And three, because we had run baseline surveys and so on, while there were overarching topics that we wanted to touch in the Women's Farmers Academy, we constantly kept changing the programming because to suit the needs of our participants. An example of this was that we actually ended up increasing sessions on financial literacy, bolstering sessions on nutritional marketing, creating more engagement, whether it was pitch sessions, what we call bush tea segments, trying to create more group work and so on, so that we could really maintain that engagement. And as you will see, perhaps some of you may know of several of these names. You have McLevin Mackey Trust, who has, I think, one of the largest farms, lettuce farms, particularly in Nevis, Dr. Kamara Louisi, who is also a female business owner and has also been worked within the Ministry of Agriculture. Ms. Theo Morrill, who has previous experience as a VP of Quality, Food Quality and Safety with Kraft, Kellogg, and other major multinational corporations. Ms. Telly Onu, who is a financial literacy expert. Right now, she's, I think, on the cutting edge of fintech within the region. And we also have Ms. Sam Alex, who really is a living example of nutritional marketing. She owns and operates a quite successful local health and nutrition store in St. Lucia. And when it comes to our WFA participants, obviously I mentioned that we had ran some surveys and so on. So this is really to just give you a bit of an overview on our women. The first thing I just want to mention, though, is that when we agreed to develop this project, we had made allocations for about 40 women in both countries, so both in SKN and in SBG. We got 359 women who applied to this. And this just showed the need for this type of gender-sensitive training as well. So obviously, we were requested to run additional rounds, which we have done, and we just completed in SKN. Usually what's interesting as well is that farming, we know, is characterized by an aging population. The age of the traditional farmer is over the age of 45, which we saw, but what was quite interesting is that 45% of participants, which is just under half, were between the ages of 18 to 39. When looking at other stats, we noticed that most of them actually worked their own farms. So it wasn't a situation where perhaps the woman owned the land and was worked by her husband or her brother and so on, which is the stereotype. And additionally, of those that worked their own farms, 96% in SKN said that at least one family member would continue that farming in the next generation, which gives us hope for the sector. With regards to agricultural marketing and selling, 58% in SKN actually told us that they sold their products to others. And of those that did sell their products, 68% actually promoted the sale of products, whether it's by means of the internet, WhatsApp, and other means. Finally, I think what was really, really interesting was with regards to the support. 94% in St. Kitts and Nevis said that they had not received support from government, and 85% had never received any formal training to support their farming. This is really just an overview of the background, the parishes, the ages, and so on of our farmers, our participants. If you notice that about 45% of them are within the ages of 40 to 49. As I mentioned, the other 45% were between the ages of 18 to 39. And then the last, I would say 20% or so is between the ages of 50 to 69. Challenges and successes. As I mentioned, we were able to pivot fairly quickly. And I just have to say kudos to SKN, because up to this date, we have trained over 600 women through various training programs since 2018. And SKN has always had the highest participation rates of any training program that we have run, with over 90% of participants graduating. And that means that they are active in the classes, that they are actually participating in 80% of the classes, attending them, and that they are submitting whatever coursework is required to our facilitators as well. We, again, in terms of co-creation and in terms of dealing with this virtual experience, this virtual environment, we try to continue a blended work approach. So one of the things that we try to do is leverage the use of technologies. We created, which we have done, which we've started from very early on, is the use of WhatsApp in terms of creating WFA or Rural Women's Academies groups. And what you notice is that you start to see a fosterhood in terms of a sisterhood, in a sense, in terms of asking for advice, reminders, even partnerships, business partnerships have kind of come through this as well. And obviously with, for example, the Facebook groups and so on, they have the ability to access previous presentations, also previous sessions as well, and so on. And what we are trying to do going forward is we are doing a huge revamping of our website. So we want to create a resource, a digital resource library, so that virtual classes, demonstrations, and so on, it will be open source, open to anyone, and will be available on our webpage as well. The future. So, I mean, when we started ideating in 2020 with Professor Samuels and the FAN team, there were ideas to penetrate the SKN market and SVG, but again, we did not really understand at the time the issues and really the need for what we provided at Helen's Daughters. And this really was a testament that the training programs needed to continue. A few other programs from incubators, from farm exchanges and so on, also need to be bolstered in both countries. And it's with that in mind that we have actually decided that we will be running the Women's Farmers Academy again next year, just like we have in St. Lucia and just like we will in SVG. And going forward is going to be a completely free program, open to any and all women that are interested in the fields of agriculture. We are actually now in the process of establishing a cluster in SKN. They have a newly elected executive board, and you will hear very soon from the president, Ms. Empress Stanley. And we've also made allocations for our central board for Mr. McLevin Truss and Dr. Kamara Louisi to hold board positions to oversee governance in all 3 countries. I just want to say that with SKN, aside from the attendance rates and so on, the engagement, the sheer innovation in the women, in their products, I think SKN is really in a, I'm very hopeful, I would say, for the situation in agriculture in SKN. It really was a telling experience for all of us. And it's something that we truly have to thank the FAN family for allowing us to be able to actually create this intervention. So with that being said, before I go on, I just wanted to actually invite first Ms. Empress Stanley, who is the president of the SKN chapter, to kind of give her experience of the Women's Farmers Academy. And then I will invite also Dr. Kamara Louisi as well to also give her experience as a facilitator. Thank you so much.
Good morning to all. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning, good morning.
Good. Permit me to adopt the protocol that has already been set. Just a little overview in relation to who I am. As Keithlin stated earlier, I'm the president of Helen's Daughter, and I was born and raised in agriculture. Hence, agriculture is my backbone. And so after my dad deceased, I took over the management of the farm, which is called Green Acres Farm. And I did that in 2019. And I was so elated to learn about this farming economy. And for me, learning different ideas and adapting different principles that has a critical pathway that is shorter, I relish that very much. And through Helen's Daughter, I was able to captivate a lot of given information in relation to sustainable agriculture. I kind of have a little shift as to how I did things from a sustainable point of view. My approach, like some of the time maybe we're using overhead sprinklers, and yes, although I was using irrigation, my main focus now is more on irrigation and a lot of composting and going in the direction of organic farming as much as possible so that we can have products that are free from chemical as much as possible. And in relation to food safety, free from chemical that can link to food safety, but also the preparation of the food. And I was elated to learn from one of the facilitator that when we look at food safety in terms of, say chicken, for example, find out meat like chicken. She was saying to us that do not fry it out like that. Leave it frozen still, and then use Clorox in order to keep the hygienic aspect of it to prevent bacteria. And I was so elated to learn about so many bacteria that I didn't even know about. And so for me, it is a more eye-opener where food security is concerned. Financial literacy for me, it was an addition to what I learned in university about financial literacy. And in certain areas, I learned new areas in relation to the financial statement. And so some of the areas, it is a little more easy for me as opposed to what I learned. So it is like a step for me. Nutritional marketing, again, where that is concerned, it's not so much just selling a product, but coordinating it or blending it with the value of the product. For example, like cucumber, I will make a cucumber smoothie, and it could be even used in the cosmetic industry. So customers more or less want to gravitate towards the product rather than just say just cucumber. the multitask, the multi-purpose use of it, people who want to tend to buy the products. So that is a great way of pitching the product. So for me, that was a plus. In relation to the practical aspect of it, I was given the privilege of visiting Mackey's farm, A1 farm over in Nevis. And again, I was blown away by the way how things are laid out. His approach from a practical point of view. And for me, that was a plus for me to come back to Green Acres Farm and diversify the way how I accustomed to do things and even how I saw my father did things back then. And then on top of it, it gave me a collaborative force with other female farmers and all of the organization that made this training possible. So I'm giving thanks on behalf of the other female farmers for all the given training that we receive and all the persons or organizers who were involved in this project to make it successful. And so right now, being the president and the executive team, we are coordinating together. Apart from learning the theoretical aspect, is to actually put it into practice and getting it out there, disseminating the information to help the younger youths, especially female farmers and people who are actually into farming, but there might not be so much farming as in farmers. And so they might have a little backyard garden, and we are there to support them to enhance agriculture, because COVID-19 has shown us that there is a need for sustainable agriculture and able to merge agriculture from a health point of view and from a sustainable point of view. So once again, I say thanks to Helen's daughter and other affiliates who made this journey possible for us as farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Empress. I will just allow Dr. Louise as well to give her experience.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. First, some background. I'm Dr. Kamara Louise. I am with the Nevis Agriculture Department. I am a livestock extension officer, veterinarian in training. Well, I'm a veterinarian, right? Okay, so my involvement with FAN is twofold, via Helen's Daughters and via group projects in terms of farming groups. So currently I am the technical officer for the Cherry Garden Livestock Farmers Group, which is a predominantly male livestock group that they have gone into doing activities that are not only sustainable, but can combat climate change so that they can produce and have better meat quality animals to take to the abattoir for slaughter. And then secondly, my function as a facilitator for Helen's Daughters for agribusiness and market linkages, which is part of my duties as a livestock extension officer. And the agribusiness section was very important in letting both groups know, Helen's Daughters, the women, as well as the Cherry Garden Farmers groups, learning the techniques and understanding the business aspect of running, of having agricultural background, having agricultural produce, livestock, etc. Because traditionally we have found that even though there are persons involved in agriculture in the region, they see it more as a traditional task instead of an actual business that they can profit off of and have some longevity down the road. And that has been one of my major tasks in terms of teaching them, providing the information, technical support, having workshops, and as well as providing the market linkages, which is the affiliations with organizations such as FAO, CARDI, FAN, and other organizations that have Jeff is one of them, that have the funds available, providing that the groups are functioning as a business, a proper business model, so that they can access these funds and continue to move forward, not just as individual farmers, but as a group or even cohorts or companion business partners. In terms of Helen's Daughters, it's been a pleasure in terms of enlightening them, the women, their participation, their learning, their earning, the will to just learn more and be more, and their motivation and determination is so outstanding. And to see that the program has reached so many women in terms of it's not even possible to facilitate all of them at once. And but it's something that not only the cohort participants have benefited from, but even persons who are associated, affiliated with them, because they have gone on to be wonderful mentors and teachers to each other, to other women in their communities. I appreciate the fact that they reach out to me for information, for guidance, sometimes inventing, because one of the main and major issues that we have as women in agriculture is that we're not taken seriously in many avenues and many aspects, finances being one of them in particular, marketing, and also even selling themselves and being taken seriously. So those are aspects that I try to cover in the agribusiness aspect, and also, you know, you being empowered with the knowledge of laws and how to move forward and how to approach financial organizations, the aspects needed in grant proposals, project proposals, business proposals, etc. And they have taken the information that has been garnered, not just from me, but from the other facilitators, because I like to tell them that it's, even though the program is broken up into pieces, everything is linked, right? And so they've seen that. So from my topic, which is agribusiness, to sustainable agriculture, to the finances, to food safety, to nutrition, they realize now that it's not just a one area that they could or should focus on, that everything is interlinked and changed. And as Empress just said, you know, and I'm glad that she said it, that she realizes now that her ideology, her mentality, her knowledge base has improved, and she's realized that everything is connected. And so now when she's doing her own production, she knows how to move from one stage to the next, confident in herself, knowing that she has the knowledge and she has the resources and the support to get to where she needs to go. And this is not just for her, but this is also for the other women who have participated in the program. And fortunately, and it's because of these women that even though there are other women who were not involved or couldn't be a part of the program, they reach out to them and they're acting as guides. Many of them have approached myself, Maki, and other facilitators outside, received emails and so on, asking for guidance, who to contact, how to proceed, to vent, to just go over stuff that they're not sure of. And the most important thing I think that this program has born into these women is a sense of confidence and knowing, right? And when you have that, these women can be so much more impactful than they already are, because they were impactful before, but they're now stepping up their game willingly and happily going into the forefront and pulling and taking other women along with them. And this is what we want in terms of not just agriculture, but in general for our communities, so that we can, you know, empower our women, ensure that they have the resources that are needed to move forward, so that the families are taken care of, everyone is eating better, they're making a profit, so that their families are better provided for, and by extension, not just their families, but their communities as well. And I think I've said enough.
Thanks, Dr. Louise. Catherine, that is all for the Women's Farmers Academy. I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you. Latoya, on to you. I'm going to share screen now.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you, Ms. Caroo and your team for highlighting us on all of the experiences, as well as the outline and the benefits towards the Women's Farming Academy. We'll now have a brief question and comments section. Persons are free to raise their hands and they would be unmuted in order to ask their questions. Feel free to also type your questions or comments in the question and answer icon area. Any questions, any comments? Any other members from the Women's Farmers Academy would like to add a little bit to their experience?
We have one question from Listra Fletcher Paul. She wants to know what was the most important lesson learned to date from your experience in the FAN project. I think this can go to Keithlin firstly, and then to Empress and Kamara.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Ms. Paul. I think our most important lesson to date was to continue to ensure that when we select our mentors, our facilitators, again, that it is facilitators that not only have are subject matter experts, but also have a vested interest in the sector and a vested interest in seeing rural women thrive. As Kamara mentioned, aside from them dedicating, yes, their 2 hours every other day and so on within the WFA, but we saw a lot of our WFA facilitators going out of their way, whether it was getting on the phone to help them access funding, whether it was, I mean, for example, Mackie Trust was the one who went out of his way, obviously created the farm visit aspect, which we have now installed as a mainstay in all our training programs. I mean, it was done in St. Lucia, but it had not been done because of obviously the virtual difficulties of pulling it off. And because of that, I think we're going to always continue to try to recruit within our region, within our countries, because the subject matter experts are there. It's just a matter of finding them and trying to grow that network, I would say. And then I would allow Empress perhaps to answer a bit as well.
Thank you, Keithlin. Throughout this seminar, ideas put together, the program that I was a part of, what I would say that I learned, and most outstanding, apart from other things that I learned, is the fact that we as women especially, we have different cultural background, especially in relation to agriculture. And it is about sharing our differences and embracing each other in such a way to enhance agriculture. Because although our cultural background might be different in certain areas, we have a common goal. And the common goal is to make sure that we have sustainable agriculture and food security in light of this pandemic. And from a nutritional point of view, to enhance and enrich our bodies so that we can have healthier lifestyles. And so that is my input. Thank you.
Thank you for the responses. Before we move on to any more questions and comments, I would like to thank Dr. Thelma Philip Brown the St. Kitts and Nevis Ambassador to the United States, for joining us. Thank you, Ambassador Brown. It's always a pleasure having you. Now we'll continue with the questions and comments.
Hi, so to add to what Keithlin and Empress said, I think the most important lesson learned from this experience is that there's power in unity. And it is beautiful to see the collaboration that the women have formed, the teams that they have put together in terms of moving forward. They understand that when they move as a unit, that they can get more accomplished. And it is great to see, because unfortunately, one of the things that we fight against so much in the region is uniting and coming and working as a team. And a lot of persons don't want to be a part of groups and so on, because there's always some kind of, you know, chaos, drama, and other, you know, things going on. But what I have seen, and it has shown that it is possible, is that when you unite and you move as a team and you move as a unit, you can accomplish great things. And so I think for both cohorts, Empress's cohorts and for Joyce's cohort, which is cohort 1 and cohort 2, the women have been outstanding examples of how you can achieve and move together as a unit to come to, and you know, to come to a goal. So that is the greatest lesson that I think that I've seen so far with this group.
Thank you, ladies. Okay. Without further, thanks everybody who participated in this first question and comment section. I hope that the answers and the comments that were provided were suitable and acceptable, and if there were any doubts, they definitely were cleared up. Without any further ado, we'll move into the second presentation by Professor Fitzroy Henry.
Good morning to you, Chair, Mrs. Duncan. Good morning to colleagues and partners. I hope you can see the screen, yes?
You can see, thanks, Fitzroy.
Wonderful. First, let me say thank you to St. Kitts and Nevis for, well, first welcoming the FAN project through these 4+ years. And thank you for the collaboration of all of those who are on the platform, and particularly Mrs. Latoya Duncan and Dr. Louisi, who just spoke about the Small Grants Program, and several others. I really enjoyed sharing in the previous webinars with you, and we really appreciate the feedback that you gave on those topics. Today, we have a topic here on food imports and production and implications for public health. And I really want to reflect on what Dr. Louisi just said. She said everything is connected, and it is true. Everything is connected, but of course, we cannot present the whole FAN project in one webinar. So we have to do it bit by bit, but what we're presenting here has connection with what we presented before, what you heard already from Helen's daughters, and what we will be presenting as we go along. Now, why this topic? And as you can see, this topic is very much in relation to even the title or the name of the FAN project. It really speaks to household food security and public health. So we're looking at this now from a policy perspective in terms of what is this relationship in St. Kitts. And the link between food security and health should not go unnoticed, because it is really critical to what we do, especially with the pandemic that just over. We need to look and see how we're dealing with food security and the public health as we move forward. And I will keep linking this food security and public health as I go through the presentation. And why? It's because for a long time, since 1966, we have a definition from the World Food Summit about food security, and it exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient food and nutritious food that meets the dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Now, the red is my emphasis, and I'm emphasizing this because this is central to what I'm talking about today. When people hear food security, they think about the physical presence or the physical access to food, but it must be related to the dietary needs and the preferences for active and healthy life. So this was the World Food Summit. And a few months after, in 1996, our own ministers of responsible for agriculture met in Bahamas, and they elaborated on that. In fact, the declaration number 5, it says food security in the Caribbean is also related to obesity, stroke, and heart attacks, and so on. My emphasis again, and what it really talks about is that it's not just the physical presence, but our ministers of agriculture recognize that it has to be related to health, particularly the big problems that we had then, and even more so now. So the question is St. Kitts and Nevis food secure? And to answer that question, we really have to look at the amount of food energy that exists. And when we look at the trend from 1963 to the most recent data we have, which is 2018, we see that the amount of energy across the decades have been improving to the point, and if you see that line across there, that is the health goal. So we're linking food security and health, as in the definition, and as our ministers of agriculture reminded us. So yes, we may say that St. Kitts Nevis is food secure because we have enough energy, food energy, to meet our health requirements. So this is one way of looking at it, but it is not the full picture. Because when we break this down now into the different food groups, we see some stark differences and discrepancies. So let us start with the staples. And we look at the trend in consumption of staples over the same period. The green line is the health goal. And the purple is the imports, and the bluish color you see at the bottom are the local production. And when we look at what we really require to meet our health goals in relation to staples, we see that we can do a little bit better in reaching that goal. So while the national figure is good, when we break it down by food groups, we see that there is some deficiency there in terms of our consumption of staples. Moving along, when we look at legume consumption, and we look at what the health goal is, we see that again that there's very little imports of legumes. It's so small that it doesn't even show on the graph. There is some, but it is so small that it only is showing the local amount on the graph. And you see that there is a big need for us to consume much more legumes. When we look at fruits, again, we see that the local production varied over the decades, And from 1983, we see that there is an increase in imports of fruits into St. Kitts Nevis. But when we look at the total, it is still not reaching the amount of fruits that is the health goal that we have in green. When we look at vegetables over the time period, we see even a worse picture. Because although we have increased the amount of local vegetables, which is the blue increasing from 1993 to present, and even though we have a little bit of imports, it is not reaching the vegetable goal that we would like for St. Kitts Nevis. When we look at fats and oil consumption, however, we see the health goal there in green, and we see the local production, and in 2018, even the local alone was above what we needed for health. But then we had traditionally large imports of fats and oils way over the health goal. And the point is that even though the first slide show you overall that we are basically on par, when we break it down by food groups, we see the differentials in terms of what we need to do. So the question is, are we really food secure? This is fats and oils. When we look at food from animals, we see a similar picture, where we are much above where we need to do in our consumption of foods from animals, and we see the dominance of imports in our food supply. And then we look at the last group of sugars, we see also the health goal. They're in green. We only need about 180 kilocalories per person per day. And you see how much more we are consuming in terms of sugars. And after the abolition of local production, the sugar mill in St. Kitts, we see that almost all imports by 2018 was from, all the supply came from imports in 2018. But overall, I think the main point is that we are consuming much more sugar than we need to meet the goal. And this is why I kept stressing at the beginning that when we think of food security, we have to look at the availability of foods in relation to health. Now, we hear that the Caribbean is importing $5 billion in foods every year. And we hear that Jamaica alone is importing about $1 billion, just under $1 billion US dollars in food every year. It's about 956 million, I think. But Jamaica has about 2.7, 2.8 million people. So when you divide the amount of imports by the number of persons in the country, we find that every Jamaican on average, we are importing $326 US per person in terms of food imports. We hear about Barbados, which imports a lot of food. Smaller country, smaller population, about 260,000. But when we break it down and we look at the amount of imports into Barbados, and we look at their population, we see that it's about $996 US per person. It's not the 1 billion like Jamaica. However, when we look at St. Kitts Nevis, we see that it's $1,174 US per person. So with the 52,000 persons and with the 61, I think, million US dollars in food imports, you see that we need to do something about these imports, because in Kitts, even though it's a small amount of imports relative to the Caribbean, but when you look at the population it's serving, it's a high amount relative to each person. So what are these food imports? Sugary beverages and other juices, that alone is $6.4 million US, and these are 2018 figures. And it's about 6.3 million kilograms of food. Then we look at cornflakes, rice, flour, and what I call baker's wares, you know, all these big products that we import, $5.4 million. And I'm going to ask the question, and I need your help. How can we, if we can, reduce this amount of imports, what we can substitute it or them with? Or are we happy with spending $61 million US in food imports? Of course, we have to import, but do we have to import all of it? And how do we select? When we look at the next item in terms of value, chicken wings and offals, $4.6 million US every year, about 2.7 million kilograms of chicken wings and offals into St. Kitts, Nevis every year. Cheese, milk, cream, 4.5 million, 1.9 million kilograms. And several other food preparations combined, 3.5 million. These are some of the top imports into St. Kitts, Nevis. And then we looked at the processed imports. And I mentioned the processed imports among the imports because we now recognize, and the science has shown, that ultra-processed foods create a significantly increased risk to our health. Yes, most of our foods are processed. We very, very small unprocessed foods we have. But NOVA and FAO, they have a classification where they have what they call unprocessed or fresh and minimally processed foods, because every food goes through some level of processing. And then we have basic to moderate processing. And then we have the ultra processing. And what this is showing is of the imports, we see that in terms of US dollars, 14% of the imports are these dangerous ultra processed foods. In fact, if we take the 44 and the 14, that's what, 58% are more than minimally processed. There is a debate about whether some of these moderately processed also create health risks. And even though some of those might be transferred to ultra processed, we are using the strict definition from FAO in terms of what is ultra processed. Some people would lump the moderate and the ultra processed together. But whatever it is, the fact is that we are not helping our health situation with these ultra processed imports. And the main ultra processed foods into St. Kitts are sugar sweetened beverages, about 2.4 million US dollars. Can we substitute that? Sugar sweetened beverages, these swell cereals like cornflakes, 1.8 million. Margarine, 1.1, bread pastry, these are the Baker's Delights, 1.0, sausages, over 1 million, sweet biscuits, 764,000. Ice cream, our ice cream, 692,000 US dollars. Sugar confectionery, $617,000 US dollars. Other pastors and so on, $463,000. So in summary, colleagues, we see that the St. Kitts food import bill is approximately $1.174 per person. We see the imports are dominant in the health retarding food groups such as sugars, food from animals, fats and oils. We see the imports are not major contributors to health promoting foods like the vegetables, legumes, and fruits. We don't import much of those, as you notice, even though we're way below the health line and the health goal. The combined supply of fats and oils from imports and local sources was more than double the health goal. Similarly, the sugar supply was more than double the health goal. A decline in local food production over several decades we have seen. And foods that are more than minimally processed account for 58. This is the 44 and the 14. 58% of our food imports that are more than minimally. And the dangerous health retarding that science has now shown, the ultra processed foods contributed 14% of our food import bill. So, colleagues, can we in St. Kitts, Nevis meet the CARICOM Heads 25 by 25 target? Now, let me tell you what that is. There was a proposal to the heads of government last month, in 2 months, well, it's in the end of February, early March in Belize this year, where there is a proposal to reduce our food import bill by 25% by the year 2025. We want to reduce this food imports. I think our heads of government recognize that our food import bill is untenable, and I suspect is the COVID fallout or the response to COVID and the circumstances surrounding COVID helped to drive this effort to reduce, and this is across all 15 CARICOM countries. Can St. Kitts, Nevis reduce or meet that target? I wouldn't go into the details, but part of the proposal is that they have now engaged the Republic Bank in Trinidad and Tobago to give very small loans to do a number of things to bolster local agriculture in the whole of the CARICOM region. And this, I think, is good, that you have a bank willing to give low interest loans to boost agriculture. My question is, while we reduce, if we can reduce the food import bill, will that reduce the amount of ultra processed foods that we're importing? We have to be very careful about what we're reducing and what we want to import. So can the target be achieved and still improve public health? That, I think, is another part of the challenge of 25 by 25. We cannot just think of food security only in terms of available foods and reducing the food import bill, because we have another public health bill that will face us in terms of obesity and chronic disease from the slides that I showed you earlier. So what are the local substitutes for these unnecessary imports? And here is where I need your help, colleagues. You know better than I do, or the FAN project, in terms of what are the local substitutes, how can we achieve that? And here is where Helen's Daughters and several other NGOs and others can come in and let us put hands together to work towards this goal that the heads want. And we, as I said, we have to make sure that we do not lose sight of the need to improve health as we go along. And what are the replacements for the ultra-processed food imports? What are we going to import? Are our taste buds so steeped into these ice creams and so on that we import, that we cannot find local substitutes, and our sausages and corned beef and so on, which these are truly ultra processed, which we know endangers our health. So over to you, Madam Chair. Those are the questions that I would like to throw out. I would love to answer your questions, but I really like to get responses from the local intelligence about, you know, how we can together move forward on this effort. Latoya?
Thank you very much, Professor Henry. Very, very interesting presentation, I must say. Sometimes it's things that we tend to say that we know. However, when the facts are presented, just as you did just now, looking at the different imports and breaking it down by dollars per individual in the population, it's really eye-opening. And I can think of so many individuals that really should be hearing this presentation. Wonderful, Professor Henry. Thank you so much for that. We'll now turn it over. This is the time where we want to get the participants more involved. Now, Professor Henry has 4 questions that he would like to get some answers to. Participants, anybody would like to comment?
We have one hand raised from Lydia Lawrence. Would she like to speak? If not, she can type in the chat. We have another question from Jarrell Stapleton, who asked about controlling the overusage of sugars. Is something that is possible, or do you think it's normal to be overused in terms of dietary consumption and use of sugar? Professor Henry.
Oh, that's a question for me. Overuse of sugars. Well, we can do this in 2 ways. We can have policies that will restrict the amount of sugar sales to persons. We can also have taxation that can reduce the use of sugars. I'm glad to see that Barbados has now, you know, Barbados and Dominica were 2 of the first to put a taxation on sugar-sweetened beverages, and Barbados has increased their taxation from 10% to 20%, and I understand that there are other agencies trying to push towards 30%. So these are other ways. In Jamaica, what they have done in terms of schools is indicated that no entity would be allowed to sell sugar-sweetened beverages that has more than 6 grams per 100 ml in their products. And that is meant to be reduced to the WHO level of 2.5, but they're doing it in a gradual way, bringing it down from 6 to 5 to 4 and hopefully going down. So there are different ways of doing that. And of course, we have the general approach of, you know, educating the public in terms of the dangers of foods to help to reduce the consumption. So we can do it by education, we can do it by promotion, we can do it by regulation, we can do it by legislation, taxation, and so on. So there are so many different ways. The question is, what is the appetite in St. Kitts Nevis for any or all of these approaches? And that is more of a cabinet decision, I think, working with the industry to see what is feasible. So, you know, there are a number of options out there. The solutions are there, you know, it's just a question of what is feasible, what is possible in any jurisdiction that we work in.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And I must say that we do have a policy that is currently, well, not in place, but we do have a draft document looking at taxation of sugar-sweetened beverages. It haven't reached cabinet approval as yet, but PAHO is actually working with us to try to finalize the document. I'm really hoping that someday soon we'll be able to be a lot like Barbados and implement these taxations on sugar sweetened beverages. It was rather alarming to see them at the top as it relates to import, to see it actually more than chicken and offals, etc. But I'm assuming that's probably because we have increased in local productions in those areas. However, I must say the appetite for sugar sweetened beverages, like we currently signed the presentation in St. Kitts and Nevis, seems to be relatively high.
We have a question, or had a question from Joyce, one of the graduates from the Women's Farmers Academy, about nutritional values and how the nutritional values of our local foods are being shared with school-aged children in order to help them appreciate local food products, and that would include beverages, I assume. So Professor Henry, do you want to talk about the school nutrition standards and other work?
Yes, well, the previous presentation that I did in St. Kitts, what we're trying to do is to look at, some standards that can be implemented, particularly in schools, because, we really don't have functional food or nutrition standards or policy. We're working on the policy, we're working on the standards with the help of Latoya and the other members of that committee. And the whole aim is to put some guardrails around what is available, particularly to children, in terms of what they're exposed to. Again, these are all political things. That's why they have to go to cabinet to be approved. Because we can recommend all kinds of things, but we're very conscious about the mood for legislation and regulations and so on. One way in which we can do this, however, is to say, okay, we're not going to ban these products in the schools or to school children, but if you want to enter the school premises and sell, then you have to adhere to certain standards. In other words, what are regarded as in keeping with the food-based dietary guidelines, in keeping with what is known from the Ministry of Health's guidance and WHO and PAHO, in terms of what would you be allowed to present. So, okay, we're not banning you, but if you want to expose our children to these products that you're selling, make sure that it hits these particular standards. It's like what I mentioned in Jamaica with the sugar sweetened beverages. So there's different standards for liquids and for snacks and we're working on that policy with the team in St. Kitts Nevis to see if we can come up with some framework that would be acceptable to cabinet, and we can at least have our children consuming in the school premises, because when they leave the premises, it's a different story, right? And you go to the corner shop, and those standards don't apply again. So at least for the school environment, and that's what we're trying to do to answer your question about what happens in schools with standards. Over.
Thank you, Professor. Any more questions for Professor Henry before we move into the open discussion section?
There is a comment from Zane Brown. It's not a question, as I would like to answer to the question posed as well. On another note, in terms of the import items, I believe it would be prudent if the import statistics can be expressed as imports from the ECCU, the wider Caribbean, and those from the US/other sources. I believe that would help to put things into sharp focus.
Let me just comment that we have that data, and sadly, not much of the imports are coming from the Caribbean. Most of them come from North America, from Australasia, New Zealand in particular, with our cheeses and so on, and from Europe. Only some items like coconut oil and a few other items like the fresh fruits, not even so fresh, but we get some items from the CARICOM exchange, if you like it. We have that data, but with 15 minutes, we only presented, the total amount. But unfortunately, we don't have sufficient intra-Caribbean trade that's going on. Most of it comes from outside of the Caribbean, and you see the kinds of products that we are importing. We need to really look at ourselves as countries and as the Caribbean as a whole to see exactly what we're doing to our bodies. We keep lamenting that, 3 or 4 out of 5 persons die from chronic disease and the obesity rates are going up and so on and so on. But when it comes to the putting things in place to prevent this, and I have a presentation in a couple of days' time where I'll actually show the figures, how much it will spend to actually reduce these imports and how much it is costing us in terms of chronic disease. It's amazing that the arithmetic is very clear, but I guess it's what, political will? It's not lack of information or awareness. I'm sure our politicians and our decisions makers, I mean, Latoya, you can tell me if our decision makers are aware of what we're talking about here, but I don't think it's lack of that. It's just a matter of getting on board and putting things in place. We have to make bold decisions instead of just reciting statistics at podium every time we have an opportunity. I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about this because this is something
yes,
it's been going on for too long. It's been going on for too long. And
this is Alafia Samuels. Good afternoon, everyone. Fitzroy, we certainly hear and appreciate your passion, and we support what you're speaking about. I just wanted to interject. There was a question from Ambassador Thelma Brown Phillip in the chat before she left. And her question, which I think the politicians are going to ask, is how much of that import is being consumed by tourists and how much is being consumed by local people? Because, although the population is 40,000, really with tourists there all the time, it could be a larger population base that's actually that.
Yes. We don't have that information for all countries. When I did the similar analysis in Jamaica, the Jamaica Tourist Board actually did some work about 6 years ago, and they actually showed the consumption of foods, and they were good enough to separate the imports from the local production. And even though they, consume a lot of the imported stuff, in Jamaica, it doesn't account for. Getting a feedback. Is that a feedback? I don't know what that is. It doesn't account for much, Alafia, and Ambassador Brown, I don't know if she left already, but
right, but that's because tourism. That's because the number of tourists in Jamaica on a given day doesn't compare with our population that's here on a given day. But in St. Kitts, you could have 40,000 St. Kitts people, and you could have maybe 15,000 tourists. So that's like half of their population, you know what I mean? So their consumption would have a lot of impact on the overall picture.
Absolutely. And the only way we can do that is if there are data out there from some tourist body that looks at the consumption. Because other than that, as I said, we were very lucky because we tried to get that in Barbados and we couldn't even get it in Barbados, which is a very high tourist destination as well. Yeah. But Jamaica, fortunately, the tourist ministry and the tourist board actually did some work. It's crude information, but it did not account for much. I mean, I hear the point. The point is that, yes, we might have a lot. But, when you think of Barbados, I mean, any given day in Barbados, you still have a high proportion of tourists out there compared with the local population. And the word of mouth is that it isn't contributing as much. But we need hard data to make that distinction, definitely.
Yes, yes. Thanks.
I think I would like to contribute a little to the questions asked by Dr. Brown, as it relates to the tourist population for St. Kitts, in particularly, because St. Kitts tends to have a lot more tourists than Nevis. Majority of the tourists in St. Kitts, I might say, they come in via cruise ships on a daily basis. So sometimes we could have up to maybe, let's say, about 10 to 15,000 tourists in one day in St. Kitts via cruise ship. However, and this is just me going after the majority of them, they still consume most of their meals via the cruise ships. That is something we know. But it would be really nice if we could actually have the data to back it up, to actually get a correct answer to Ambassador Brown's question. Okay, we are currently in the open discussion segment. Participants, you may provide questions and comments by using the raise hand icon or typing in the question and answer box. Persons who raise their hands will be on mute so that they can ask their question. So participants, please, if you have questions, further comments, anything from the previous presentation by Keithlin, any other discussions or key points to Professor Henry's presentation, this is the time to do it now. Please feel free, share your comments, ask your questions.
Mr. Gregory Robbins' hand has been up for some time, so I think
good morning, Prof, and Professor Samuel also. I'm not speaking specifically to the St. Kitts and Nevis situation, but having worked around the region for many a year, I sometimes feel now that I'm back home working as a consultant, there seems to be a disconnect between policy, what this project stands for, and I think Prof. Samuel in some previous webinars gave a lot of the solutions to the questions that Prof. Fitzroy is asking. But what I see, there's no production planning of the very set crops that CARICOM has outlined for food security. Crops and livestock, they have outlined for food security. The islands do not have a production planning system that says we're going to produce X amount and we'll satisfy Y. And because of that, it is left to farmers' whims and fancies. I'm producing vegetables, I'm producing citrus, I'm producing this. And there's no collegiate system between the ministry, the NGOs, and the farmers for producing some of the raw materials that could go into the very said breakfast cereals and whatever. The other thing is, most of the islands don't have a huge citrus production system like probably Trinidad, Guyana, Dominica does have, because of their agroecological conditions. And I think we have to, as was said by Prof. Fitzroy Henry, we have to start to trade among ourselves, because I'm in Dominica now. There's a lot of citrus wasted in peak season. And we need to bolster the agro-processing base, because the issue of tourism, you know, is a vital point. I think when the cruise ships come into Dominica, Dominica doesn't have a large cruise ship stay-over base. They don't advise the tourists on the cruise ships to eat out, you know, to avoid any issues of food poisoning and so on. So they stick safely to the canned drinks. So I think it's basically an issue of there's some disconnect between the production base and the policy guidelines coming through the various governments and support from fan projects and so. And I think that has to be corrected, and it is just not being corrected. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that point.
Listra is making a comment in the chat in response to that, saying that the private sector plays a big role in importing the food. Have there been any initiatives to get the private sector more invested in assisting local producers in St. Kitts Nevis, for example, providing markets or restaurants or so on, I guess, creating demand from farmers and trying to substitute local production for imported. But it's the private sector is really the people who are making the determinations what the market wants and what they can make profit from importing. And then those calculations go into what they import. But do we know any initiatives in St. Kitts to make that link between the distributors or private sector and the farmers?
Well, I don't know if anybody from agriculture would like to answer that. However, briefly on my side, I was recently at a meeting with Ministry of Agriculture, and I know for a fact that the PS of Agriculture have already started a meeting with those different sectors in order to establish and to develop different protocols as it relates to the linkage between the local producers and those sectors, including the restaurants, hotels, supermarkets. So I know that discussions are being held on that. I don't know if anybody from agriculture in St. Kitts Nevis is currently present to assist and to speak a little bit more on any other initiatives that they might have going or those that they held in the past. Anybody? If anybody else have any additional questions or comments that they would like to share from Keithlin's, Ms. Caroo's presentation, as well as Professor Henry's presentation, please feel free to share, comment. We are now in the open discussion section.
I see there was a query about the figures on wings and offals and so on. Those were the annual figures for 2018, okay? Those were the annual figures for 2018. The last available complete set of data that we had available to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I also saw that, and that had me a little shocked too, but I'm thinking that we know the agriculture ministry in St. Kitts and Nevis, they are now producing a lot more locally produced food from animals. So I'm thinking that might be one of the reasons why that figure is actually there. Any other questions, comments? Please feel free to provide questions and comment by using the raise hands icon, typing in the question and answer box, please.
Charmaine has her hand up, so if she could go.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I wanted to pick up on the 25 by 25 comment from Fitzroy's presentation, reducing food imports by 25% to the year 2025, and within the context of the Caribbean. And I'm thinking we can probably look at always a small intracurriculum trade. How do we now capitalize on what we know is happening right now? Because we're now mixing imports of one country with the export of another country. Like, for example, I know that in Trinidad and Tobago, we produce a lot of things like soft drinks and a lot of ultra processed foods, the sausages and sweets and all those things. And I know that these are exported to other CARICOM countries. And what I'm thinking or suggesting is that instead of each country looking at how do they reduce their imports. I think when we think imports, we think in the majority from out to the region. But we can look at working regionally and see what we can do in terms of coming up with how do we now look in the first instance or in part of the way as to how do we now work with each country to improve our products. And I know we talk about reformulation, meeting different standards in terms of sugar levels and so, but what it really says is that if I'm saying to Trinidad, for example, and I can speak to Trinidad because that's where I'm from, is that those companies that produce soft drinks, those companies that produce the sausage, the ultra processed foods and so, look at what you're doing. I think maybe we may want to have a regional perspective when we talk about how to reduce some of those imports because we want to have more healthy local inputs. And maybe we could look at local from the perspective of it being CARICOM local. But there's also the argument, I know people talk about reasons why we import things from out of the region simply because of the price to get things in the region. Even those things such as some fruits and so tend to be cheaper than from getting them within the region. So it's just a few comments in terms of do we start to look internally as well and come up with a policy that's maybe not just country specific, but more regional in scope that would help us to reduce some of the unhealthy foods and promote more of the healthy foods.
Thank you.
I hear you, Charmaine, and good morning. You're right. There are going to be some challenges, as you can imagine, with interregional trade with the ultra processed, but it's nothing compared with the amount that is imported from outside of the region. I didn't have the opportunity to show you the proportions that are coming from outside of the region. We can reduce that 25% quite easily from outside, even though I think persons are still going to be looking in their own domestic situation to see how much ultra processed are coming from even within the region. But I think the thrust of the heads of government is really to get 25% down from extra regional trade. But before we do that, we have to think of substitutes and replacements. And there is where the discussion, I think, is pointing to, you know, what do we are net importers of food. We are net importers of food. So we have to import if we're going to have our populations consuming foods. The question is, what do we need to import? And from where? So they go hand in hand. There are going to be some regional spat about, you know, the sausages and the soft drinks coming from Trinidad to other countries. But I can assure you that is very small in relation to what we see coming from elsewhere. And I think it has to be done regionally and nationally. We don't import regionally. So I think it's really up to individual countries to you know, work within maybe a regional framework to decide exactly what they're going to do you know, in their countries. I don't know if others have comments on this.
Any other comments? Thank you, Professor Henry.
Yes, thank you, Fitzroy. And this is Alafia again. I just wanted to share with the audience some of the work that's happening at the CARICOM level. And yes, with all the whatever, you know, around CARICOM and so on, but still, there is a process that is being supported by this project where we are looking at an upcoming meeting of ministers of health and ministers of trade in April of this year. We had a previous one before the pandemic, and they set up intergovernmental working groups, 2 groups, one to look at obesogenic environments and one to look at alcohol. And the obesogenic environment one focused on trans fat, and it's bringing to the meeting in April a proposal to ban partially hydrogenated oils, which are all imported and which are the main ingredient that goes to create trans fats in multiple products that are used. And so, you know, hopefully we need to get some lobbying going in countries to make sure ministers of health and trade are aware that this trans fat proposal is coming to them. And then as Fitzroy said, you know, the action is in individual countries. Then the action moves to country level, and we need to support really getting a ban on the import of trans fats. All high income countries have done it. 40% of the world has banned trans fats. Why should we be the ones bringing up the rear? Come on, people, we're the Caribbean. We led this NCD thing. And among developing countries, we can lead again with this trans fat. So we really at so many different levels need to push the ban on trans fats in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Samuels. Any other inputs, recommendations before we bring this rather interesting seminar to a close? I know many individuals wouldn't definitely don't want to go there. The conversations are extremely stimulating and eye-opening, as well as you're hearing all the passions, the questions, the comments, the recommendation, and the commitments. But before we bring it to a close, we are now giving participants one final chance to give their inputs. Okay, thank you. We want to thank our funders, the IDRC, as well as our collaborators of the project, University of the West Indies, University of Technology Jamaica, McGill University, and the University of Cambridge. We also want to thank you for attending this webinar and contributing. We want to thank for all the stimulating conversations, questions, comments, commitments, the lessons learned, and ways in which you think we can move forward.